go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go.
Five bets, 5 minutes. We're going to start the clock momentarily, but Jimmy's in the house. Means we're going to talk a little bit about this Heat game, right? The other side, not so much. Check out the NBA parlay video for that. We welcome you back in as always. We hope you're well. We appreciate you being part of the 50K Strong Plus. Mind you, strong here on the Odd Shopper channel. If you're not, well, fix that. Change that. Just hit the subscribe button. Don't do it for me. Do it for someone. Do it for Andy. Do it for Greg. Do it for Raza. Do it for Lofty. Do it for so many others. Who the hell is this asshole? Don't do it for me. Do it for the people that deserve it. All right. And if you want, hit the thumbs up button. That you can do for me. All right. The small little things I ask. Let's start right away. The clock is moving, folks. All right. So let's get to points. Hey, guess who's first up? Jimmy Butler. Guess what we're going to do? 21 points. That's it. That's all we need. Just 2-1. Hey, Butler is on a tear. The Heat are on a tear. Miami's winning games. Dallas is not, right? But Jimmy Butler has found made it at least, an artwork now. A piece of art, has made it art. I don't know the fucking phrasing of it, but getting to the free throw line. James Harden is like, damn, that dude's getting to the line too much. Jimmy is a threat. Multiple stages of scoring, but when he's able to get to the line and command that on the line, well, now you've got something. And Butler getting 21 points doesn't now.
Let's go.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Stokastic NBA Strategy Show Friday morning, which means Adam and I are going to be breaking down this 9-game NBA slate together. As you guys come in, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and shout out to Prize Picks, who is sponsoring our show today. And also, I want to shout out that for the start of the new year, we've extended our free trial offer over at Stokastic.com. It used to be 3 days free if you're signing up for the first time. Not anymore. Now it is 5 days for free. So if you haven't checked out all the tools we have over at Stokastic.com yet, click on the link that we have below and you can get 5 days free trial, access to our player projections, our ownership projections, our new lineup generator, which is the easiest way you guys could possibly make plus EV lineups. Just a couple clicks of the button and it's going to generate up to 20 lineups that you could upload directly into FanDuel and to DraftKings. So if you haven't checked out our site yet, you can do it for free. No risk to you at all. Adam, how are you doing on this Friday morning?
Doing pretty well. Glad that Thursday slate is over, which has kind of been a recurring theme for me recently in DFS. But yeah, yesterday sucked, so ready to get on to today.
Yeah, it sucked for everybody except for fantasy guru Drew, who won
Yeah,
all of the
congrats to
top
him.
places last night in
That
the
was
$15.
that was impressive. Good for him. I think
Yeah.
he said he had been going through a cold streak too, so glad to see that because I know how that feels.
Yeah, and it's funny how quickly stuff could turn like that. Where I know for me, it's been kind of the inverse where I didn't do well last night, but I had a bunch of NBA slates where at least as of late I've been running pretty good. And then one thing that had made a difference is just my single entry lineup had been my highest scoring lineup for
Sure.
a handful of days this week. Which just then when I have that, and like the $100 on DK, the $40 on DK, it ends up making for better slates than they otherwise would have been. But on the flip side, I have run as badly as possible with some of my bets. Just every prop bet that I've had this week, somebody gets in foul trouble, gets injured. Just has been really consistent. So
Yeah, I guess it was. I want to say it was Wednesday. I hadn't bet for a couple of days, and I was like, yeah, I'm getting my ass kicked at DFS. Like, I'll switch things up, throw some bets in, and so then of course it was just like, oh, I have the over 3.5. It's going to be 3. I have the over 2.5. It's going to be 2, and it's like, all right, well, this is going just like DFS does.
yeah, so it's just one of those things that goes up. Now I know somebody had messaged us on Twitter, tagged you and I, and maybe Eric, who's banned from Twitter, so we can't see the tweets. And he
Can't
asked
imagine
us,
tagging Eric, thanking somebody for anything.
it was a question of the guy had asked, what do you do when you're in a cold streak? Like, how do you change your process? And you really, if you're a positive DFS player, somebody who's made money over long, you shouldn't be changing anything, right? Because these are just things that happen, ups and downs. So don't be too concerned about any kind of up streak, down streak. Like, you shouldn't be doing something different because you've won a few slates in a row. You shouldn't be doing something different because you lost a few slates in a row. Now, if you've been a losing player for 3 years, yeah, you probably want to change something. But
yeah, that's always the tricky thing for me too, because like you're always trying. To me, this is one of the most difficult things about playing DFS. Like when you played poker, you could go back and like analyze hands to the point where you can, with like complete certainty, know if you played it in a profitable way, like how much money you would make on that hand over, a larger sample. So like with DFS and stuff, because you're always trying to improve, and part of that is going to be like making small changes to your process, but then you also don't really have any concrete way of being like, oh, that's a good adjustment I made, or in 6 months I'm gonna have lost all my money because of that adjustment I made, and I'm gonna want to go back. Like that's the hardest part for me, because like, yeah, you don't want to like overhaul your process, but I also don't want, 2 years from now, I don't want to be doing the same exact thing I'm doing right now. I'd like to think that I've improved something. So like that's always the most difficult part for me.
yeah, and for now, we've got today's slate to talk about, where we will try to figure out what we are going to be doing with all the players that we like, dislike, good value options that we have. And this is going to start with the New Orleans Pelicans taking on the Orlando Magic. And this is a Magic team that, and I know that we're seeing injuries on the Pelicans side of the game where Zion's been out, Brandon Ingram's out. But still, for a team with one of the worst records in the NBA, Orlando Magic being only 1.5 point underdogs in this spot kind of goes to show the depth, and they are getting some respect here from the bookmakers. But for New Orleans, in addition to the key injuries to Zion and Brandon Ingram, we've got Najee Marshall questionable. We've got Herb Jones questionable. What could potentially happen for value on the wing with this team, Adam, if Marshall and Herb Jones are both ruled out?
Yeah, I mean, if those guys are both out, you should get a lot of playing time from Trey Murphy. You probably get a lot of run from Dyson Daniels and increased playing time from Jose Alvarado. I also think I think it would increase the chances that you get some Larry Nance alongside Joval. We know that they can go that route. They typically haven't wanted to this year, but we've seen them do it at times. And prior to this year, that's what Larry Nance was. He wasn't a backup center. He was your backup 4. So we know he can do that. And if both Marshall and Jones are out, they're going to be pretty shorthanded there. So I wouldn't be surprised in that case to see a bit of Nance alongside Joval as well.
Yeah, and the starting lineups are tough to predict for this team. They do different things. I wouldn't be shocked if they start Jackson Hayes alongside Jonas Valanciunas, something they've done on a handful of occasions. I don't think Jackson Hayes is particularly good, but if he starts, he's at a cheap price point. He's somebody that I think would be a good value play. So be on the lookout for what the starting lineup looks like. That's kind of my gut feeling, though, is that they would just go with Jackson Hayes alongside Jonas Valanciunas, especially against an Orlando team that does have one of the bigger front courts in the NBA. They have some pretty big size in their squad. So I think that would probably be the route they go down. But as for the pay up options, McCollum, Jonas Valanciunas, are these guys you're going to want to be paying up for today?
And that's a good call on Hayes. He's another one where if those guys are out, I would expect more minutes. They had kicked him back out of the rotation last game, but very recently he had been playing the 4 essentially. So yeah, I'm with you there too. As far as the main pieces, we have Joval pulling 27% ownership right now. That stands out just because it is a 9-game slate, which means you're going to have a lot of good center options. And right now we assume, I mean, from a projection standpoint, we're projecting Marshall and Jones in. So if that's the case, like I don't expect Valanciunas and Nance to be playing alongside each other, which means that we have seen more playing time for Joval recently, which is great. You know, if he does go out there and play 30 minutes or so, he's going to look good at 6,800. He's about a 1.2 DraftKings point per minute guy without Ingram or Zion on the floor. It's a good matchup, all of that. The concern I still have is just, you know, do we really believe that just from this point forward, Larry Nance plays 18 minutes a night? Or do we get back to what we were seeing earlier in the year where you're talking about 24 or 25 minutes for Joval, in which case at 6,800 and 27% ownership, that would not be somewhere I want to be. So I think it's a case where he looks good for sure, but probably going a little bit over-owned right now, just from a combination of risk in terms of playing time and just alternatives on a slate of this size. But individually, you know, ignoring ownership still certainly looks good. CJ McCollum's price tag's back down a bit to 8,700, still only pulling 6% ownership, which makes him look interesting. Again, on a 9-game slate, you're not going to have any shortage of good guard options to get to, but he has been very productive, as you would expect, without Zion or Ingram on the floor. He's going to play big minutes. It's a good matchup. At the very least, I think he's a pretty appealing option to get to in tournaments.
Yeah, and then also I'll mention here Jonas Valanciunas is a little bit different looking on FanDuel as compared to DraftKings. FanDuel could only roster one center. He's also a bit more expensive. So $7,700 for Valanciunas on FanDuel, though even there, currently projected for 7% ownership. So Valanciunas relative to his price, and then also position on FanDuel, still a somewhat popular play over there. Is there anything else you want to talk about from New Orleans? And then once again, guys, Marshall, Herb Jones questionable. So be on the lookout for injury updates.
Yeah, nothing else right now. Again, you know, if those guys are out, it's going to open up a lot of wing minutes.
So let's talk about the Orlando side of the game. And for the Magic, this is just going to be a difficult team to parse on a lot of these slates, especially the backcourt, where you've got Fultz is healthy, Suggs is healthy, and then it's just so many guys that could potentially give minutes to. Cole Anthony as well in the backcourt. One thing that could end up being something that happens here is Franz Wagner is listed as questionable. I kind of hope he plays just because I don't want to project anybody on this team as being good value. But is there anything that would stand out to you if Wagner isn't able to play?
I hope he plays just because they have so many guys that kind of look the same and do the same thing that when you take somebody out, it turns into this guessing game of like, well, I know somebody's going to be good, but I have no idea how the minutes are going to go because it's kind of like pulling names out of a hat. We've said it before. This is the deepest bad team I think I've ever seen as far as having like actual NBA rotation players throughout the entire roster and being dog shit. But it makes it difficult from a fantasy standpoint because when somebody gets hurt, because most teams you can just say like, all right, well, there's only 7 like NBA players on this team. So one of number 6 or 7 are going to step up. With Orlando, it's like, I don't know, it could be any of them. But assuming Wagner is in right now, I don't really think there's much that stands out with this team getting healthier. You do have a $6,200 Wendell Carter Jr., a $6K flat Markelle Fultz. They're both pulling double-digit ownership. I think that's fine. You're probably getting 28 to 30 minutes from Fultz. You're probably getting 30 to 32 from Wendell Carter Jr. They're both going to look okay. But again, there's not going to be any shortage of options at their respective positions or price points either. So no real issues with them, but also not going crazy over them. Outside of that, there's not really anything that stands out here. Banchero played 33 minutes last game. I expect him to sort of live in that 33, 34-minute range. He's always appealing in tournaments when he's low-owned just because of the ceiling. But with there being so many games and Orlando being healthy, it's not a spot where I have any sort of confidence. Same goes for Franz Wagner at 6,400. Decent price tag, decent point per minute guy, but there's just going to be a lot of those today.
Yeah, my hope once again is just that Franz Wagner plays, so I don't really have to project anything particularly well for Orlando, because this is a team that's running a 10, 11-man rotation right now. And, you know, Wagner's a big piece, a lot of usage. The ball's in his hands a lot. As far as minutes go, really only him and Banchero are the 2 guys that we could count on to play for north of 30 minutes, whereas you got Fultz around 30, Wendell Carter Jr. around 30, Banchero, Wagner, the only guys who are really playing north of 30 regularly. So I hope I don't have to give those minutes to anybody else just because it becomes such a nightmare to project this team, considering that they're not good yet, but this is a team that I think is a couple years away from being really good, and you just see all the depth they have here. So
it's going to be wild in a couple of years when it's just like, oh man, OKC and Orlando are 15-point favorites. I'm worried about the blowouts here.
So the other thing too, though, is because we've talked about this too, about some of these teams like Orlando, where these teams have so much depth. We're probably a few years away from the NBA expanding. They're going to add like 2 to 4 more teams, which is going to be a nightmare for DFS when we have like 18 game slates. But we're going to, yeah, we're going to have to be going down that path because there are teams like Orlando where it's like they have 15 rotation guys on the roster and they can't all play every day.
Yeah, it's like the exact opposite of baseball. Like baseball, you can't find like a good pitcher to save your life, and they still are talking about potentially adding teams in the near future. But with basketball, it's just you see it all the time. Like in March and April, so many guys are good, like NBA quality basketball players, except for like they're not NBA quality in the sense that like there's only 5 guys on the floor and LeBron is a hell of a lot better than all of them. But like they're NBA quality in that if you just throw them out there, they are still really good at basketball.
Yeah, so we'll see what ends up happening with that. My guess is I think Las Vegas is going to get a team. I think Seattle is going to get a team, potentially Mexico City, and then one other. But I do think we're going to see 2 to 4 more NBA teams get added sometime in the near future just because the amount of talent that is in the league.
I wish Baltimore would get one.
Who'd you say?
I said I wish Baltimore would get one. Just selfishly because that's like the one reason I consider moving to DC instead of Baltimore is just because I would rather go to Wizards games than anything else.
How far is the drive?
With traffic, like an hour. Okay. So it's not bad, but also with this job, it's impossible.
Yeah, I mean, just to go to sporting events in general, I think a lot of people think that when you cover sports, it means you get to be at sports more or watch more. Kind of the inverse because it means you're working during them. Yeah,
like I'm lucky. I live like 10 minutes from the Orioles and Ravens, so like I can kind of just get off the show and be there in like the first inning or whatever. But not happening with DC.
Next game on this slate, the Golden State Warriors against the Cleveland Cavaliers. I know that we don't have any kind of word on this. My gut feeling is that the Warriors are going to be resting a bunch of guys today. So not only did they play last night, and we've seen the Warriors be cautious on back-to-backs this year, but they played an overtime game against Boston last night. And now it's a game they're on the road in Cleveland. So not only is it the tail end of a back-to-back, but the tail end of a back-to-back on the road. Steph Curry came back from injury not that long ago. Klay Thompson hasn't played in back-to-backs this year. The other thing that also makes this kind of complicated, Kuminga is questionable, JaMychal Green is questionable, James Wiseman is questionable, Andre Iguodala is also questionable. But I think guys like Draymond, Steph Curry, Andrew Wiggins are all live to be rested today. So I don't have any real strong feelings on this game. I just want to see the injury report. But do you think resting is in the cards?
I think it's certainly possible. At the very least, we pretty much know Klay is going to be out. They did also make the lineup change yesterday, and they said that's going to be a thing going forward. Jordan Poole starting in place of Looney. Today, you should, if they don't rest guys, you would still have Looney back in the starting lineup today, I assume, with Klay being out. But it's kind of a spot where if Klay is the only guy that rests, I have essentially no interest in this team. If they start resting other guys, then, we know how it goes with Jordan Poole. You take out Steph, you take out Wiggins, it's going to be Jordan Poole chucking 100 shots, probably making like 4 of them. And you're going to look back and be like, oh man, I ran bad because he shot 4%. And then you're going to be like, it's Jordan Poole. I probably should have known. But, tough matchup with Cleveland. It's just a situation where there's certainly the potential here for Golden State to get shorthanded enough where the matchup doesn't even matter that much.
Yeah, and to bring a betting angle into this, we are now at a point where we basically only have Russell Westbrook and Malcolm Brogdon left as the 6th man of the year options. Every other player that's had favorable odds has moved into the starting lineup or gotten hurt or something's happened. So guys like Christian Wood becomes a starter. He was one of the betting favorites. Tyler Hero was the betting favorite coming into the year. He's been starting all year. So
how many games do you need? Like, does Maxey moving to the bench, if he stays on the bench the rest of the year, does that mess it up?
Let's see how many. It's you have to have come off the bench for at least half of your team's games. So I think there's a couple of things that are going to mess up Maxey. Is he's already made a bunch of starts and he missed time, so he would have to come off the bench for at least 41 games this year.
Okay, so probably would have to do it like the entire rest of the season for it to even be close.
Yeah, because he's started 21 games so far. He's come off the bench for 5. So yeah, that's also going to be tough. It's such a dumb award. Because teams, I feel like, play into this too, where somebody like Lou Williams was good enough to start for a long time, but he just had this reputation being a 6th man, so they just left him in that role to keep winning the 6th man of the year. But it is really dumb when you have somebody who it's like, hey, Jordan Poole is one of the favorites to win the award. And then all of a sudden, oh, well, now he's starting. Now it's like, okay, well, he's kind of too good to win the award now or something. Like,
right. My favorite part of the award is just how much it pisses off Josh, because he's just been losing his mind over Russell Westbrook being the favorite, because like Westbrook is obviously not very good, but it's just like, who else are you taking as sixth man? Unless it's like you said, him or Brogdon.
Yeah. So to me, I hope it's Brogdon because I bet him before the season started.
It should be Brogdon.
So, but also he's somebody who the Celtics are so good, they kind of rest him a lot. Right. And it's a dumb
you're not, the Celtics are so good. Like his role just isn't the same role as Westbrook. So like, you're going to just get better counting stats from Westbrook.
Yeah. So I don't know what that's, how that's going to break. And also Westbrook could end up being traded by the Lakers and starting somewhere else, or could be sent home. And then he might be invalid and Brogdon might just end up winning it by default. So I did bet Brogdon again at 5-1 to win sixth man of the year last year.
I can see Westbrook in the like trade call now, just being like, whoever you trade me to, I need to come off the bench.
Yeah, I need this award for my legacy.
Right.
So anyway, for the Warriors, though, I think we just need more information here. It's so hard to say on the tail end of a back-to-back what's going to happen. But I do agree with you. It seems like no matter what, Jordan Poole's probably going to end up standing out because he's going to be starting. And it seems like at least some guys are going to rest.
Yeah, I'm with you. And Cleveland should beat the shit out of them if they do.
Yeah, and Cleveland currently favored by 7.5 points, which, I mean, Cleveland being the second biggest favorite of the entire night, I think kind of gives you an idea for how odds makers are looking at this game as a potential rest spot. Because if the Warriors are fully healthy, the spread is not 7.5 points for this game. Now,
right. Yeah, I mean, it was 6 yesterday, and we know Boston's better than Cleveland. You do have them on the second half of the back-to-back too. But.
And it is, if we see guys get ruled in for the Warriors, I think the line moves in favor of Golden State. And then the same thing too, if guys are get ruled out, I think Cleveland ends up being like 12.5, 13-point favorite. It's a line that's just set in the middle of the potential outcomes for rest in this game, which that's kind of how I would look at the line is what information could we get from this? Nobody knows. 7.5 points is just a hedge line in between whether the Warriors end up resting guys, end up playing guys. And then even from the Cavs side of the game, we've got Donovan Mitchell is questionable. So that in itself adds another kind of wrinkle to this game and the expectations. If Donovan Mitchell doesn't play, what does do to Darius Garland? And are there any other plays that would stand out for Cleveland?
Yeah, I mean, if Mitchell doesn't play, it makes Garland look better. We saw the huge game from him last time out, and not particularly surprising because he's a really good basketball player that just gets more opportunities, both in terms of assists and usage. If Donovan Mitchell is out, it's a good spot, whether Golden State's resting guys or not. You have a fast-paced team, nice pace-up spot for Cleveland. So if Mitchell is in, you have $8,100 Garland. He's fine in tournaments. He's pulling 3% ownership. But where he really becomes interesting is if Donovan Mitchell is out, you're going to get that increased production from Garland. Pulling the numbers up now, I think he's 1.2 to 1.3 DraftKings points per minute without Mitchell on the floor this year. 1.23, 29.5% usage rate, 37% assist percentage. He's just going to look fantastic if Mitchell sits.
Yeah, so that would be the main guy to look at. And then also, I mean, if we see the Warriors sit, it would be a much easier matchup than it would typically be against Golden State. And, the Warriors who, when they have everybody out there healthy, and by the way, I love their starting lineup with Draymond Green. I think that's their best possible starting five. But if he's out, if Steph's out, it's just a weaker defensive team. As for the front court players, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, Kevin Love's minutes, basically impossible to predict. They go up and down all the time. Now we've also got Ricky Rubio in the mix, who, while playing limited minutes, is still somebody who's going to siphon away some ball handling duties and some minutes away from other players. Is there anything else that stands out from Cleveland as potential players to get to?
Yeah, so I mean, you're getting some ownership coming into the front court here with Mobley and Allen. They're both going to look good one way or the other, just pretty cheap price tags. If Mobley's able to avoid foul trouble, you're looking at mid to upper 30s in minutes. He gets in foul trouble fairly regularly, but it's not like you're going to project it. He's close to a fantasy point per minute guy. But if Mitchell's out, he's going to look a little bit better as well. 1.08 DraftKings points per minute for him without Mitchell on the floor. Jared Allen, over a fantasy point per minute guy, should play low to mid 30s. He's going to look good here. So both of them, with or without Mitchell, are going to pull some ownership, and deservedly so. They'll look a little bit better if Mitchell's out as well. Other than that, I don't think there's really anything else if Mitchell is in. If he sits, we got 41.5 minutes from Karis LeVert last game. I would expect him to start and play big minutes again. He's about 0.96 DraftKings points per minute without Mitchell on the floor overall this year. Drops to about 0.9 when you throw Darius Garland on, but at a $5,400 price tag with a path to playing upper 30s or more, he's going to look very good. Kevin Love's down to $3,800. He only played 9 minutes last game, though. Didn't play at all in the second half. He has struggled to shoot since coming back from his thumb injury. field goal percentage basically across the board has just been down for him. So I do think that's a legitimate concern. He's just at that price point where you look at it and it's like, all right, well, it's really easy to see how low and Kevin Love just wins you tournaments tonight. But then 90% of the time, he's going to just completely kill you still at that price. So I just wish he was more expensive so I didn't have to think about it. But probably still won't really be getting there just given how he's been playing and the fact that his playing time's kind of been trending down.
The next game, we've got something unforeseen in this next game, Adam. The Miami Heat are playing the Dallas Mavericks. If you've looked at the Miami Heat injury report for today, maybe the most shocking thing we've seen all season, there's nobody listed on it. I've never seen anything like this in my entire life. They've got the guys like Yurtseven, Duncan Robinson, and Jovic who are dealing with, long-term injuries. But Bam Adebayo, Jimmy Butler, Tyler Hero, Victor Oladipo, Kyle Lowry, none of these guys are on the injury report, not even as probable. First time all year that the Miami Heat have done this. They're taking on the Dallas Mavericks. And when it comes to this game, very, very low pace, because there are three teams that play a significantly lower pace than the other teams in the NBA. One is the Cavs, who were in the last game we just talked about. And then we've got the Dallas Mavericks, second slowest pace in the league, Miami Heat, third slowest. And everybody else is playing not like crazy faster, but there are tiers to pace. And these are the three slowest pace teams in the league, kind of on a tier of their own. So as a result of that, the total in this game is 218.5. It is about 10 points lower than any other game that we have on the entire slate today. And with the Heat also being healthy, it's kind of hard to prioritize anything. But how do you view the Heat in this spot? Which,
by the way, is absurd. This game has a 218 total, and we're talking about how slow these teams are. I'm still in the habit. I know me and Lofty talked about it. I'm still in the habit. My first thought when I look at a game like this, and I'm like, oh, it's got a 218, 219 total. It's like, wow, that's so much higher than I expected. And then you realize everything else is like 230. But yeah, it's not a very appealing fantasy game when you compare it to everything else. You can still get fantasy production. That is something that we've seen it a lot recently. It just seems like, anecdotally, it's been kind of stacked together. But last night, for example, there weren't a lot of points scored in the Boston Golden State game, but you just needed players from that game because it was so concentrated. And that is one nice thing here is that you're going to get guys playing a lot of minutes, but prices are pretty much where they should be as well. Adebayo coming in at 8,400, Butler at 8,300. They're pretty much correctly priced for each other to be playing. Adebayo leading the way on DraftKings right now at 7% ownership. I think Tyler Hero is mildly interesting just because he's down to 6,700, but we haven't seen the same sort of playing time from him in his return either. Maybe we get back to where he was playing 38 minutes before his injury, but last game was a blowout, but you still only got around 15 to 16 minutes in the first half. He was on pace to play 30 to 32. That's about what we saw in the previous game as well. So certainly not projecting those 36 plus minute games from him right now. So it's not a spot that I really have any confidence in. I don't see much that I like from Miami outside of if you just are playing 150 lineups and randomly land on some, Bam or Hero or Butler, whatever it may be.
And then we talk about Dallas on the other side. We do have an interesting scenario in the front court because Christian Wood is a fractured thumb. So he's been the starting center and he's been playing massive minutes for this team when he's been healthy because Maxi Kleber's been out. And I know earlier in the year, there was seemingly distrust in Christian Wood from Jason Kidd, but he's felt better about him as of late. So recent games, playing time for Christian Wood, 35 minutes, 36 minutes, 48 minutes. That was in a double overtime game, 35 minutes, 39 minutes. This is a lot of minutes that has to be filled for the Dallas Mavericks. Who's benefiting the most from this? And what are we looking at from potential value for DFS with the absence of Wood?
So the one, I guess, nice thing, I don't really know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but the thing that makes it a little bit easier to talk about this rotation is that you can look at what happened last game and Tim Hardaway Jr. was out. Now you're taking out Christian Wood, but Tim Hardaway Jr. is probable. So I think it's likely that Hardaway Jr. just takes most of those 35 minutes that Christian Wood played. Dwight Powell played 22 minutes in that game. JaVale McGee played 3 off the bench. Davis Bertans played 6. You're probably going to get a little bit more playing time for that combination of guys just because you don't have Christian Wood playing center now. But you also can, for example, I expect Tim Hardaway to just replace Christian Wood in the starting lineup, and you get a starting lineup of Luka, Dinwiddie, Hardaway, Finney-Smith, Powell. So it doesn't necessarily have to make a huge change here or a huge difference here in terms of playing time, but it does probably just give a 3K Dwight Powell a little bit more playing time. Right now we have Christian Wood projected in, so our numbers for Dallas are off, but my expectation is you get a little bit more Dwight Powell. Maybe JaVale McGee gets a rotation in both halves. but not really useful for fantasy. I think that one interesting part is you're taking a very high usage guy in Christian Wood out, and you're replacing him with a lower usage guy in Tim Hardaway Jr. But overall this year, without Christian Wood on the floor, still 1.66 DraftKings points per minute for Luka. It's just a situation where his rates can only go so high. He's going to just put up those numbers really regardless. So I think it's probably a marginal bump for Luka, for Dinwiddie. Dinwiddie in particular, just because we have seen him really struggle recently when he's playing all of these minutes with Luka and with Christian Wood. Without Christian Wood on the floor this year, 0.97 DraftKings points per minute for Dinwiddie. If you put Luka on and take off Christian Wood, I expect it to be lower than that, but probably higher than the completely non-existent rates that we've seen recently. It's taking forever to load, but I would expect him to be around 0.85, 0.9 DraftKings points per minute, I think. So I think it's probably a little bit of a bump for him at 6,700, but Finney Smith at 3,800 should play a lot. We saw him return and just play 35 minutes out of the gate. Not a very good fantasy point per minute guy, but he's cheap and should play a lot of minutes. And the answer to the Dinwiddie with Luka on and Christian Wood off is 0.92 DraftKings points per minute.
Yeah, and then as for Luka himself, 12,400 on DraftKings, currently projected for 18% ownership. Over on FanDuel, Luka 12,200 projected for 20% ownership. And, it's Luka. He's been terrific this year from a fantasy perspective. But at the same time, too, I mean, if I was just building lineups and entering them right now, obviously this could change if more value is to open up, particularly if the Warriors end up resting everybody. But I would find it hard, I think, to play north of 20% of Luka on this kind of slate, just because of how expensive he is right now. But how are you viewing Luka? Because while he should always project as a top guy, I just don't know in this particular matchup against a tough defense at a really slow down pace that I'm going to feel great about a ceiling score to roster him as just by far the most popular pay-up option on this slate right now.
Yeah, the issue I'm having is just how many good guards there are, and then also that you have Jokic and LeBron at the top as well. Luka's at a point where he's playing so many minutes and he's such a good point per minute guy that I don't really think he's overpriced at 12-4, but you do also then have this difficult slow-paced matchup against Miami. And then you look at the other, just looking at guards for a second, that are $2,000 to $3,000 less expensive. John Morant taking on the Lakers, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander taking on Sacramento. You have Trae Young, you have Kyrie Irving against Utah, you have De'Aaron Fox against OKC, you have McCollum against Orlando. That's just the guards. Then you also have Sabonis, LeBron, Jokic as cheaper options that are still clearly really, really, really good. I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult for me to get to Luka today than it has been on other recent slates. That being said, if value opens up, he's still going to project as the top scorer on the slate because the guy's playing 40 minutes a night and the best point per minute guy in the league.
Yeah. So once again, what is going to make me get to Luka there's nothing that's going to change Luka's projection for me at this point. He's going to project, as a really high fantasy scorer, and then whether I could get up to his price point or not, it's going to depend on do the Warriors rest everybody? We just have unlimited value. Does some other unforeseen injury happen where we get a whole bunch of value? As things stand right now, I would just find it hard to get to as much Luka as the field is getting to. But is there anything else you want to add from this game?
Nope.
So let's move on to the next one. But first, shout out to Prize Picks, the sponsor of our show today. And if you guys haven't signed up at Prize Picks yet, here's something you really should be taking advantage of. If you want access to our tools, and just the cheapest way to do it, if you guys are trying to get our player projections, ownership projections, sign up at Prize Picks. Use our 5-day free read. We've also got our BetMGM partnership that I'm going to be talking about later, because when you sign up using our Prize Picks promo, you get up to $100 bonus on your first deposit and 1 free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum. So you get all the stuff that we have behind the paywall. We get it at a really cheap price for yourself and some bonus money to play with over at Prize Picks as well. And then we also have prop projections for Prize Picks over at Stokastic, where you could look at all the different props, our projected odds and going over and under relative to our projections. So go check that out. But also, if you just want access to all of our DFS stuff, go make a Prize Picks account. Use our code that you have below, or it's going to be thrown into the YouTube chat right now. 1 free month Stokastic Plus Platinum when you sign up using that. Next game here is the New York Knicks against the Atlanta Hawks. And at least as far as the games we've talked about so far, this is the one where I think we feel best about the minutes for some of the starters, because that is all Tom Thibodeau knows how to do, is play his starters big minutes. We've got RJ Barrett back now. So we've got the big three of the Knicks, Randall, Brunson, Barrett, all expected to play big minutes. And the other wrinkle here is that Mitchell Robinson is out. What do you expect from the front court of the Knicks with Mitchell Robinson not playing?
The opposite of what I need, whatever that ends up being. That's how this has worked out when Mitchell Robinson is out so far this year. But Isaiah Hartenstein's 3K. I assume he's going to start. I don't know. They could go Jericho Sims. But my assumption is Hartenstein at 3K flat. It's just going to be so difficult to find reasons to get away from him. Like, obviously, he can play poorly. They can go to Jericho Sims. They could, if they wanted to, play Randall at the 5, although they typically don't do a lot of that. But yeah, I mean, it's 3K flat for a good point per minute guy in Hartenstein, 0.9 DraftKings points per minute this year. Even if you get like a 24-24 split between him and Sims, it's just going to make him look good. The only, I guess, counter argument I could make is in large field tournaments, if you wanted to just build some lineups where you, even if Hartenstein's starting, you play some Sims instead and just hope that you get that rotation where Sims, who is also nearly a 0.9 fantasy point per minute guy, just happens to take more minutes. Like, that's an easy leverage spot where right now we have Hartenstein pulling 35% ownership. We have Sims pulling less than 1. Even if they got like a 24-minute split down the middle, they're going to project about the same. If Hartenstein's starting, I think you project Hartenstein to play more minutes, but that would be like the only sort of creative thing I could think of here. Other than that, it's just this guy, he's 3K flat. Like, it's just so hard for him to truly fail.
Yeah, and even then, and also because he is, like you said, he's a really good points per minute fantasy producer. And even if he comes off the bench, it doesn't mean that we can't play Hartenstein, which it's a possibility he comes off the bench. But still, you look at some of his games, even off the bench. We've seen some big ones this year, even in limited minutes. And in some of the games where Mitchell Robinson's been out, we've seen also Hartenstein come off the bench and play fairly well. So it looks like as of right now, Hartenstein is going to be one of the most popular value plays on the slate. And I totally understand why. It makes a whole bunch of sense to me.
And the sort of downside risk to him is look at what the Knicks did in the second half last game. You don't have to go any further back than that. Isaiah Hartenstein starts the second half, plays 5 minutes and 13 seconds. He never comes back into the game. Jericho Sims plays the final 6 minutes and 46 seconds of the third quarter. He plays the first 6 minutes and 47 seconds of the fourth quarter, and then they did close with Julius Randle at the 5. So I do actually think that closing lineup is interesting to note because we hadn't seen them do it a lot, but we also know that Hartenstein's pretty much out of favor with Tibbs this year. Like, he is not playing the role that he was expected to be playing. So I do think there's a good chance that you don't get a full 48 minutes here. So that, combined with the fact that he is center only, is the biggest risk. I think that it's very likely Hartenstein puts up a good point per dollar score. It just comes down to, like, right now we have him projected for 20 DraftKings points. Yes, that's like 7x his salary. But if you get 20 DraftKings points from a center on a 9-game slate, you're probably completely drawing dead right out of the gate.
Yeah, so we'll end up seeing what happens. And right now the ownership is, high, but it's not like insanely high. If Hartenstein was to start at center at min price, he'd end up being higher than 35% owned on DraftKings, which is where we have him projected right now. Over on FanDuel, where he's power forward and center eligibility, we have him projected for 51% ownership. That's as of right now.
Sorry. Good call from Everyone Hates Chris in chat. I didn't even catch it because it's so weird. I didn't even look for it. Jericho Sims is power forward and center on DraftKings, which is really interesting because you're taking that risk. Assuming he comes off the bench, you're taking that risk, but like, he's not taking up a center spot, and he shouldn't project that differently from Hartenstein.
Yeah, and right now, projected for basically no ownership, 0.1% projected ownership for Jericho Sims over on DK with, like you said, the power forward center eligibility. FanDuel center only at 3,600, where he is a little bit different of an outlook there. As far as the pay-up options, Randall, Brunson, Barrett, any of them going to be priorities for you?
Probably not in the sense of like I'm jamming one of them in, but they all just look good based on how many minutes they play. Julius Randle at 9,800, 14% owned. The Robinson injury could certainly open up a couple more minutes for Randle, or at least solidify those minutes as well. For example, last game you got 14 minutes from Obi Toppin. You got 34 from Julius Randle. But earlier in the year, when they were shorthanded, we did at times see them play alongside each other. If you're going to get some center minutes from Julius Randle, it makes it so Obi Toppin can play his 14 to 16 minutes and Randle can still play his 38 to 40. So that's potentially good, because otherwise that rotation last game would be really concerning, since we did see them go back to what we were seeing prior to Obi Toppin's injury. The thing that had made Julius Randle so difficult to roster this year was that Obi Toppin's going to play 14 minutes, and that means Randall's playing 34. With Robinson out, you could still get 14 for Toppin, 38 for Randall. So that's a potential positive for him as well. RJ Barrett's just cheap at 6,500 for somebody that's likely to play 38 minutes or so, if not more. Jalen Brunson at 8,600 in tournaments looks fine. Pretty similar, I think, to like CJ McCollum in terms of he's pulling 6% ownership. He's not going to be a huge priority here, but he's just going to play so many minutes that he's still interesting.
Other side of the game, Trae Young, questionable, dealing with an ankle injury. Bogdanovic, questionable, dealing with a knee injury. I know DeJounte Murray wasn't great the last time that Trae Young sat, but if Trae Young and Bogdanovic are both out, DeJounte Murray is going to be one of my, if not my highest owned player on this entire slate. It would be so hard for me to get away from Murray in a scenario where there's no Young or Bogdanovic. Do you see it the same way? And is there anything else we should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, I mean, I just immediately have flashbacks to the last time that happened and DeJounte Murray was completely useless. But you just kind of have to toss that out and realize that he is $7,800. Even if Trae Young is in, DeJounte Murray is going to look pretty good at this price tag. His rates go up if he's out. They don't go up probably by as much as like people would assume, but and that's because Murray's just not a very good shooter. So there's only so much his rates can increase by, but they do go up, and the playing time should be there one way or the other. So with Trae Young projected in right now, we have Murray projected for 10% ownership, 7% chance of being optimal. Both of those numbers are going to go up drastically if Trae Young is out, especially if Bogdanovic is out as well.
And then is there any other value plays that we should be looking at if there's no Trae Young, Bogdanovic? Murray's the immediate one who stands out as being the obvious play. But as far as the cheap guys go, is there anything that we could look at from that standpoint and be like, oh, this is a good value option with those guys out?
DeAndre Hunter and AJ Griffin, probably. I think you see a nice, and John Collins. I think you see a nice bump in usage for Hunter if Young is out. Collins, in theory, should see a bump, but he really just has sucked so much this year, no matter who's on the floor. But he's only 5,500, so I still wouldn't mind going there. He's getting 16% ownership, even with Young projected in. I think he would look a little bit better if Young is out. And then if you if you wanted to like just roll the dice on somebody, AJ Griffin at 3K flat, if Bogdanovic and Young are both out, that's opening up a lot of minutes. Griffin is somebody that can play multiple positions. He is pretty much ahead of every bench player in the rotation at this point, with the exception of Bogdanovic. Every wing, I should say, except for Bogdanovic. So I think he would step into more minutes at 3K.
Yeah, and then once again, I mean, a lot of these teams are just really banged up. Of course, not the Heat, the only team that's healthy somehow today, but a lot of these other spots. Just guys, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure to check out the deep dive and live before lock later, because we got some of these scenarios that look like they're going to change a lot as we go through the day. Now, the next team, we've got the Los Angeles Clippers against the San Antonio Spurs. Clippers, one of the healthy teams today. We've got Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, neither of them on the injury report, both expected to play. So we got a game that chance it turns into being, somewhat lopsided. Clippers with their fully healthy squad going up against a San Antonio Spurs team that's just frankly not very good. So with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard both healthy and active, does this make anything look good from the Clippers?
Not particularly. This is just a really tricky team when everybody's healthy, because they rest so frequently that prices get elevated. The only thing really standing out right now is that Zubats at 5,500 is pulling 11% ownership, 12% chance of being optimal. I always like going to Zubats. This is more ownership than we typically get on him, but it is a very good matchup against San Antonio. You have a 120 implied total for the Clippers as well, which it's just insane that there isn't more to get to from this team. But assuming that everybody is in, Kawhi's up to 10-3 because George has been out so much. George at 9,100 would be semi-interesting in tournaments, but he's just close enough in price to a lot of guys that are going to project a bit better that it's difficult to prioritize him. I think this is kind of just a team where if you're playing 150 lineups, maybe you use them as, dart throw contrarian plays. Like, somebody is probably going to have a big game here. It's just that they're all a little bit overpriced.
Yeah, and that's going to be the case for a lot of Clippers games because, like you said, they're not frequently healthy, but they are at least in this spot. And the Spurs, all things considered, the Spurs are kind of healthy because Devin Vassell is out, but he's not for an extended period of time. Knee surgery, he's not going to be back until sometime after the All-Star break. So Jakob Poeltl, Keldon Johnson, Trey Jones, to an extent, these guys all benefit, but somewhat difficult matchup here against the Clippers. I have not really played a whole lot of Spurs other than those spots where guys get to be, ruled out for this team, because this is another team that does weird things with their rotations at times. And especially if the game gets out of hand in the first quarter, we see these hockey line shifts from Popovich where he just goes entirely to the bench. But does anything stand out to you from the Spurs?
So with Devin Vassell out, you do get a nice bump in usage for Keldon Johnson. He is 7,500. We do know the ceiling that he has. He showed it last game when he went for like 60 DraftKings points. He's just always going to be an interesting tournament option at that price because of the 30+% usage rate. But from a median standpoint, he's priced pretty much correctly. Jakob Poeltl at 6,300, only pulling 4% ownership seems pretty interesting. He was in foul trouble last game, but typically he's going to give you around 26 minutes. But there's, again, just nothing that really stands out at their respective salaries. The only guy on this team pulling double-digit ownership is Jeremy Sohan at 10%. It's just another team where it's an appealing game environment, but pricing's pretty much correct. So I don't think there's one guy that really stands out. I think it's just, you get to some Poeltl here, you get to some Johnson there, Jeremy Sohan, in a third lineup, but nothing that I'm really building around.
Yeah, and we do have, at least on FanDuel, 22% ownership going to Keldon Johnson at 7,100. Seems a lot for me in this particular matchup where he's going to be drawing defense from Paul George, Kawhi Leonard. The defense is going to be able to focus on him a decent amount as well. So I do think he's going a little bit over-owned, at least as far as FanDuel is concerned. Now let's move on to the Brooklyn Nets against the Utah Jazz. Ben Simmons got ejected from the game last night, and boy, is he falling out of favor with Nets fans and Nets beat reporters. I see nothing but negative things said about Ben Simmons, and he's legitimately played well this year as well, which kind of makes it funnier. Now, slow start to the year, to be sure, for Simmons, but he has stepped up and played some big games for this team as of late. And we still have no Kevin Durant today, tail end of a back-to-back, so I don't think TJ Warren is going to be active. What stands out to you from the Nets? This is another team where the rotation has not always been the easiest to find out.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing we know is we should have a $9,900 Kyrie Irving playing without Kevin Durant. That's going to make him look good. There are, a million good guard options on this slate, but he's certainly one of them. Nice matchup here against Utah. The ceiling for him is fantastic. So I do like Kyrie, especially because right now we have him projected for 2% ownership. That probably comes up, but at the same time, you do just have an abundance of good guards on the slate. So I wouldn't expect his ownership to be too high. Ben Simmons at 7K is difficult for me to get to. He has been a solid fantasy producer. It's just that when Kyrie is in, for one, his assist percentage goes down. But for two, I just don't trust his playing time quite as much. He played 34 minutes in the game that Kyrie was out, but that's a situation where you really needed Simmons to be out there as a playmaker because nobody else on this team really can do it. With Kyrie in, you have more flexibility to down the stretch, put Ben Simmons on the bench so that they can't foul him. And that clearly, hurts his playing time. He played 26 minutes a couple of games ago when Kyrie was in and Durant was out. Yesterday, obviously got ejected, so you can't read into the 18 minutes. But in the first half, he played around 14, 15 minutes. I just think you're probably getting around 30 from him here, which at 7K makes it kind of difficult to get to. Claxton at 7,400 does benefit from Durant being out in terms of his per minute production. He's really the only guy on the team other than Kyrie, which again just speaks to how bad everybody on this team is. But it's just a bunch of guys that can't create and can't really do anything other than catch and shoot. But Claxton does see a bump in his production. Had another big game yesterday. Played 35 minutes as well. I think on average you're getting 30 to 32. But to me, it's Kyrie and Claxton as the most appealing options. But at their price tags, it's still difficult to truly prioritize either one.
And the other thing that just with Ben Simmons, he's 4 or more fouls in all but one game in January. That's just going to create a lot of variance in terms of playing times. That he's had an issue just defending without fouling, and his points per minute production has been greater as of late. But the minutes, it's just hard for him to be consistent when he's getting into foul trouble nearly every single game that he's out there. But there's still an upside to be sure in Ben Simmons. Now on the Utah side of the game, Lauri Markkanen's had an outstanding year. He is now the betting favorite to win Most Improved Player of the Year award, and he, to me, is a surefire all-star this year. But the one drawback now with Markkanen as far as DFS goes, he is so expensive that as much as I like him, I'm not willing to pay this price tag for Markkanen.
Yeah, he's been great this year. This isn't even it's funny his salary's gotten so expensive. He's been a great offensive player this year, but when you just compare him to other players and what they do on a per minute rate, it's just difficult to get to him at 9,500 when you're throwing him into the same conversation with guys like John Morant and Kyrie Irving and Paul George and just all these other guys. So it's a good matchup and all of that, but I still have difficulty paying that price tag. If you want to get to a $5,700 Walker Kessler, that probably is the most appealing spot here. Played 28 minutes last game. My concern with him is that with Lauri Markkanen in, you're back to not getting any minutes where Vanderbilt and Kessler play alongside each other. In 3 games so far where Vanderbilt's come off the bench, we've seen him just be the straight backup center, and Kessler play like 27, 30, and 28 minutes, and was going to play more than 28 had that game been competitive. So far we've seen that. My concern is just like, is that actually what happens the rest of the year? How often do we get games where it turns into, 24 minutes for both of them for one reason or another? So there might be a little bit overconfidence in Kessler's playing time, but either way, I think he clearly projects as the guy that gets the bulk of the minutes here. And if you go to like 28-20, it's going to make him look good, especially in this spot against a Brooklyn team that can't rebound for shit. So he's actually only pulling 2% ownership right now, which seems low to me, both in terms of I think it ends up being higher and also in terms of I don't know why it's so low. But I do like Walker Kessler here. He's probably my favorite guy to get to. Clarkson, Beasley, Conley all look fine. Sexton 4,500 played 22 minutes last game, probably plays around like 24 here. But to me, Kessler's the guy I actually really like.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to not say him. He's had an outstanding rookie year, not to, relitigate the Rudy Gobert trade, but obviously Walker Kessler was part of it. And it seems like the Jazz have really got a great haul, and kind of the hidden part of it. None of us knew coming into the year how good Walker Kessler was going to be. Not even the Jazz, or else he would have been playing bigger than, like 10 minutes per game to open up the year. But as a starter in recent games, 28, 31, 32, 27, 30 minutes for Walker Kessler, and the fantasy point totals 38, 57, 37, 41 in the last 4. So clear upside on Walker Kessler is somebody who makes sense to get to. Anything else you want to talk about from Utah?
Nope.
So let's move on to the Indiana Pacers. They're on the road against the Denver Nuggets, and the Nuggets with Nikola Jokic just rolling as of late. So they are now the team that is expected to finish as the number 1 seed in the Western Conference, and massive spread in this game. The Denver Nuggets 11-point favorites, by far the biggest of the entire night. And the main reason why is because from the Pacers, Tyrese Halliburton is out. He is dealing with his elbow and knee issues. So he's out for like another couple weeks or so, maybe longer than that. In his absence, it's been TJ McConnell who's primarily benefited. We did get a big game out of Andrew Nembhard last game, although a portion of that did come in overtime, not in overtime, garbage time, the opposite of overtime, garbage time last game. But what are you expecting from the point guard minutes between Nembhard and McConnell today? And are either of them guys you're going to be gravitating towards?
Yeah, so McConnell 5,800 on DraftKings now, so that price tag slowly increasing. I still think he's fine at that price. 6,900 on FanDuel, somehow pulling 11% ownership. That seems kind of ridiculous. But at 5,800 on DraftKings, I still think it makes sense. You also, though, are probably getting too big of an ownership gap where Andrew Nembhard at 5,300 is pulling 3% to McConnell's 21. I think that maybe turning some of that McConnell into Nembhard makes sense. Overall this year, without Halliburton on the floor, you've gotten 0.85 to 0.9 DraftKings points per minute from Nembhard. You've gotten around 1.05 to 1.1 from TJ McConnell. The reason that McConnell, outside of just the fact that he's been the better point per minute guy, the reason McConnell looks, or I prefer McConnell, even though he's going to play fewer minutes, is when they're on the floor together, McConnell's the alpha in the sense that he's the one dominating assist opportunities. Neither one is ever a high usage guy, but McConnell's the one dominating assist opportunities. So Nembhard's production is really dependent on how many minutes TJ McConnell plays. If TJ McConnell plays 24 minutes and Andrew Nembhard plays 34, then you're getting like a good 10 minutes where Andrew Nembhard is just the playmaker out there and he's going to look really good. The problem is if McConnell plays well and this game's competitive and you do get that 28 to 30 minute game from McConnell, then you're not getting nearly as many minutes where they're playing alongside each other. So, or not playing alongside each other. And that really hurts Nembhard because when he shares the floor with McConnell, even without Halliburton out there, he's like a 0.7 fantasy point per minute guy this year. He does basically nothing. He's played 176 minutes, 0.66 DraftKings points per minute. Assist percentage drops to 16%, has a 12% usage rate, and that's with Halliburton off, but McConnell on. So that's why I think McConnell's still the preferred option here, even though Nembhard does play more minutes. And if you just look at the rates without Halliburton, they're relatively close, even though McConnell's a little bit better. That's why I prefer McConnell. It's just that if the game is competitive, Nembhard is basically just at the mercy of how many minutes McConnell plays. So I do think this ownership gap is too wide, but I still think even though he's coming off the bench, McConnell's the better fantasy option of the two.
Yeah, if they were to play the same minutes, for sure. I agree with you. And I do, even in less minutes, I have McConnell projected better right now. So certainly see that angle. The one thing that I, once again, just get back to the spread of the game, I'm a little concerned about is I do think one of the more likely scenarios that Denver wins this game fairly easily. And then potential for Nembhard garbage time again, although I'm not sure I would be getting to Nembhard in this spot anyway. McConnell being the highest priority from the team. Is there anything in the front court that you like getting to here?
Not really. Miles Turner at 7,100 at 2% owned is interesting just because he is a good point per minute guy without Halliburton out there. He's around 1.2 DraftKings points per minute. Massive underdogs here at Denver, so there is some risk there. Also, obviously plenty of foul risk with Jokic. I like the upside that Turner gives you, but you also just have so many good centers on the slate that I don't think you can really prioritize it.
So let's move on to the other side of the game. We might have a center that we want to prioritize, Nikola Jokic, who I think a lot of people are going to be asking, who do we spend up for today? Nikola Jokic or Luka Doncic if the salary permits it? I think my preference is going to be Jokic on DraftKings and then Luka on FanDuel. DraftKings just because we could roster multiple centers on DK, so that would make Jokic a little bit easier to fit in. And then FanDuel, we're going to play one center. I'd probably gravitate a little bit more towards Luka if the value is to permit us to spend up as freely as we want. But I mean, Jokic is in a good matchup against the Pacers, and he has just dominated as of late to the point where, people have been up in arms, just outraged about the prospects of Nikola Jokic winning a third consecutive MVP. But he is so much better than everybody else right now that it's almost hard to deny at this point. He is a triple-double in all but one game since January 6th. In that game, he had 9 assists. He had 21 points, 18 rebounds, 9 assists against Phoenix. He has had at least 9 assists now in all but one game since December 18th, over a month now. I mean, he's doing everything for this team. The usage is there. So the scoring numbers have been up relative to the start of the year. The assists are there. The rebounds are there. There aren't really any negatives about Jokic other than he's center only eligible.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, it's going to be easier to get to him on DraftKings since you can roster 2 centers. I think there's certainly an argument to just going a little bit more balanced today, and at least with the way value looks right now, and just having like an extra Morant or SGA or whatever it may be instead of Jokic, or Luka. But I do think that right now on DraftKings, Jokic is probably a little bit easier to get to. Luka's probably easier to get to on FanDuel. It's a great spot here against this Indiana team that plays at a fast pace, doesn't defend. We know Jokic is just ridiculously good. Yes, there's blowout risk here, but also there's a good chance, if this game gets out of hand and Jokic loses significant minutes, that he triple-doubled in 3 quarters. So the spot for Jokic looks great. 20% ownership looks fine. I'm interested in some of these other pieces too, though, just given the matchup and the lack of salary. Jamal Murray coming in at 6,600 just still looks good here. They continue to stagger him with Jokic. We had 2 games ago when Michael Malone was first out. In the first quarter, they didn't stagger, but then they did in the first half rather, but then they did in the second half. They did in both halves of the last game. So I expect that to continue to be the case going forward. Jamal Murray didn't take advantage of it last game when he managed to record 0 stats in his minutes without Jokic in the first half. But at 6,600, you're likely getting 33, 34 minutes from Murray if this game's competitive. He certainly can be the one to blow them out as well. So both, I think you can play him with Jokic, that's fine. But also if you don't have Jokic in a lineup, I kind of just like Murray even more because there's going to be a lot of production from Denver tonight, one way or another. It's just a matter of where it comes from. If it doesn't come from Jokic, Murray clearly the second most likely guy. Then you have Gordon and Porter, both at reasonable salaries as well, both pulling double-digit ownership. No issue getting to either of them. Bones Highland at 4,300, pretty thin play. He's pulling 10% ownership too, which I don't love. If that ownership were to come down, I wouldn't mind just gambling on his upside in tournaments. If he's 10%, though, I'm probably just going to find other spots to go to.
Yeah, and by the way, I also agree with you. Some of these other pieces could make some sort of semblance of sense. None of the role players, like bench guys, do I want to be getting to. We've got Jeff Green. It's being questionable, but even if he's out, I'm not going to be looking to play, the likes of Zeke Naji or anything like that. So is there anything else you want to bring up from Denver?
No.
So before I was talking about Prize Picks and how you guys get 1 free month Stokastic Plus Platinum if you sign up at Prize Picks. I didn't mention, though, that there is a offer over there where they have a special deal on Luka Doncic, the over-under for his points at Prize Picks, 0.5. I like the over quite a bit on that one. So basically free money there, but there's a chance you guys can't play on Prize Picks. Depends what state you live in. If you don't have access to Prize Picks, probably have access to BetMGM, where if you sign up at BetMGM using our link, you get 2 free months of Stokastic Plus Platinum. Just make sure you use our link when you sign up over at BetMGM, so they know that you guys came from us. That'll get you 2 free months of Stokastic Plus Platinum. But in addition to that, you get an insurance bet of up to $1,000. So even if your first bet loses, insurance bet of up to $1,000 will be hitting your account over at BetMGM. If you or somebody that you know has a gambling issue, call or text the number 1-800-GAMBLER. 2 games left on the slate to talk about. The next one, Oklahoma City against the Sacramento Kings. And OKC hanging in. A lot of people thought this was a team that was just going to tank. Now I'm starting to wonder if Chet Holmgren was healthy, is this a team that would be really in the play-in mix? Because SGA has been leading this team. He's been fantastic. Josh Giddey's played more consistent minutes and been better as of late. But it's kind of hard to figure out anybody beyond them. So we'll talk about SGA and Giddey in a second. But is there anybody that you could see yourself getting to outside of those 2 players from the Thunder, Adam?
After those 2, I think it's Dort and Jalen Williams without the Y. Those guys have been playing solid minutes as well. Dort, 5K, small forward. Jalen Williams, 5,200, point guard and small forward. So you actually have Dort getting the second most ownership on this team behind Giddey. But 7,700 for Giddey certainly looks fine. We did get the random pull back the reins on Josh Giddey game last time out, at least in the first half. He only played 13 minutes. They did still get him up to 30. If that game had been competitive to the end, he probably gets his normal like 32 or 33. So I still like getting him at 7,700. The ownership at 25% probably is a little bit high relative to optimal percentage, just given how many good guards that there are. But we still have him with about a 19% chance of being optimal, which is good. Dort is playing bigger minutes. He's not a very good point per minute guy, but he's just likely to be on the floor for 30 plus minutes. He's only 5K. I like getting to SGA in tournaments where he's only pulling 8% ownership. We have him going a little bit under owned. It's a good spot against Sacramento. We know that in a competitive game, you're likely getting 35, 36 minutes. So I do really like him as a tournament option.
And then is there anything else we should be talking about here from Sacramento, from OKC against Sacramento? Talked about Josh Giddey there. SGA, as far as the pay up option goes, we've talked about so many good guards to get to today that I think he warrants some exposure, but the right around 10% he's getting on DraftKings and FanDuel, I think seems totally reasonable. It's going to be hard to prioritize him just considering all the other pay up options and guards that we have. But anything else you want to mention from OKC?
No.
So let's talk about the Sacramento Kings, and they've been dealing with an illness, some sort of bug going through the team. So Alex Len, Matthew Dellavedova, and Domantas Sabonis were all out last game. Sabonis clearly matters quite a bit more than those other guys. And Sabonis once again listed as questionable to play tonight. So Rashawn Holmes kind of unexpectedly moved into the starting lineup last game. I thought it was going to be Trey Lyles that started. It ended up being the case. It was Rashawn Holmes. Holmes ended up playing the bulk of the minutes. In a matchup against OKC, would you anticipate Holmes starting if Sabonis is out again?
Yeah. The thing for me, and I thought this was a really big advantage on the night slate. I just managed to screw things up elsewhere. The Kings have played like 0 minutes this year without one of Sabonis, Holmes, Len, Keta, or Metu on the floor. So I didn't think that they were going to go to a lot of like smaller lineups with Trey Lyles at the 5. I thought they might close that way if the Lakers closed with LeBron there. But I thought that in general, the combination of Metu and Holmes was being under projected. So I ended up playing a lot of Holmes on that night slate where he was only like 25% owned at 3K. He smashed. I just, screwed up other stuff, namely Malik Monk. But I think that he probably starts again. And more importantly, if he does start, I think he plays big minutes again. Maybe not 30, but 24 plus, I think is very likely if he starts here. And at 3,500, that's going to make him look good. But hopefully we just get Sabonis in. We don't have to worry about it. It's just so fun when Sabonis and Fox play. And it's a good spot for them. 123 implied total for Sacramento. Phenomenal offense. The 2-man game between these two is great. Fox is only 8,200. Sabonis 10.5. I like them both quite a bit in tournaments if they play. And then, the one nice thing about if we don't have news on Sabonis, if you go there and he does get ruled out, at least you have plenty of options. Like you can obviously drop him down to Holmes, but also, you can potentially swap him to Fox, assuming it's, in your utility spot on DraftKings. You're going to have guys from OKC that look good. You're going to have guys from the Memphis and Lakers game that looks good. So you should still have options to swap stuff around here if we get late news on Sabonis and he's out.
Yeah, and then also, like you said, Fox, big beneficiary when Sabonis isn't on the court. We see a big usage bump go his way. Are there any of these other guys that we should be keeping an eye on if Sabonis wasn't to play that we should be getting to?
De'Aaron Fox would look good. Like, you get a bump in usage. The thing that scares me there, though, is just that Sabonis and Fox together is such a good combo that I worry about Fox's efficiency. But at 8,200, the opportunities are still going to be there, so he's going to look good. You just get increased playing time and or opportunities for Herder, Barnes as well. Lyles is up to 4,100. I wouldn't really want to get there. Malik Monk's playing time has been trending down, really culminating with last game where he played 10 minutes. But the previous 2 games, he played like 15 minutes as well. So not super excited there. I think it's mostly that it would open up the home stuff.
Yeah. And I do tend to agree with you. If we were to see Sabonis sit, I think we would see another start from Holmes like we saw last game. One game left on the slate to talk about, this one. The Memphis Grizzlies against the Los Angeles Lakers. From the Memphis side of the game, we're starting to see Desmond Bane get back to playing normal minutes. Jaren Jackson Jr. kind of getting better about playing through foul trouble as of late. He's become a big favorite to win Defensive Player of the Year, and I think that is totally justified. But with a relatively healthy Grizzlies team, is there anything you're going to be prioritizing?
No, but I do really like the spot here. Like, it's always difficult to truly prioritize Ja Morant just because Memphis pulls back. That just doesn't give him as many minutes typically as other guys in his price range, and even when the game's competitive. And then Memphis just somehow manages to be in a ridiculous amount of non-competitive games as well. But for example, their last game against Cleveland, 1-point win for Memphis. Ja Morant played 32.7 minutes. Most other guys in that price range are just playing 36, 37 minutes in 1-point games. So that's the concern, but it is a really good matchup against the Lakers. He is only 9,600. He's pulling 17% ownership. I think he's a very good play, but I also just think that there's other guys in that price range getting less ownership that are very similar. For example, we just talked about SGA getting half the ownership at $100 more, I think it was. I think that they are very, very, very similar, and neither of them should be getting double the ownership of the other, especially when you can safely project SGA to play 2 to 3 minutes more than Morant. So looks good, but certainly somebody you can pivot away from if you already have a lot of ownership elsewhere. Dylan Brooks is down to 4,800, which is just a pretty crazy price point to see. His usage does, not surprisingly, take a big hit, though, when he's playing with Bane and Jackson and Morant. But there is still a nice ceiling for him at 4,800, just given his ability to get steals. And then, you just hope he knocks down a couple of threes. Desmond Bane had some first quarter foul trouble last game, but did get to 32.5 minutes. That's interesting to see. His price tag's fallen a little bit to 7K. If we're going to start seeing more 32 and 33 minute games instead of 28 to 30, it's going to certainly make him look better. He did have his minutes staggered with Morant last game too, which is really, really important. They were doing that earlier in the year, and we were seeing Bane, he saw his assist percentage skyrocket. He was playing really well. Then when we were getting these games where we finally had all 4 of their main 4 guys healthy, they hadn't been staggering them. You were getting Dylan Brooks and Jaren Jackson with the second unit, and that was really a negative for Bane. But last game we did see him stagger with Morant, which is very good news going forward. Jaren Jackson obviously gives you a high ceiling. Steven Adams should get 1 million rebounds here. I always like him when he's low owned. So I really like this Memphis team in general. I just think that from an optimal versus ownership standpoint, the 2 guys getting ownership, Morant and Brooks, are probably going a little bit over owned. They're still good plays though. And then I like getting to any of Bane, Jackson, Adams in tournaments.
Shout out to Hippopotamus for the super chat. It is a sticker of a hippo dancing, I believe. Not exactly sure, but it looks like it's a hippo dancing. He's got some goggles on, and I don't even know hippo. I don't even know how you found that sticker of yourself. But thank you for the super chat. We appreciate it. And looking through these Memphis prices, I think there's a ceiling in all of these players because guys like Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., John Morant, they're such good players, but they don't have great median projections relative to what their prices are. So there's somebody who, if you're just running the optimizer, running your lineups to Fantasy Crunch, you're not going to get to very many of these guys. And I mean, if there's enough value that opens up on the slate, I probably ultimately just won't end up playing them. But, if it's a slate where we end up being restricted with value, I do think one way to find upside would be to mix in some of these Memphis guys who do individually have upside. But ultimately, 9-game slate, there's probably enough value where they kind of become afterthoughts. But let's move on to the Lakers. LeBron James is listed as questionable. I'm calling bullshit on that. He's been questionable the last few games. I've never really taken it seriously. Same for you?
Yeah. Typically, I mean, we do get those random games where he gets ruled out. The other day, I think he went from probable to out. Actually, he did go from probable to out because I bet unders on Westbrook. Yeah, and then he got ruled out. So that was a good feeling. Somehow still won. But regardless, yeah, you get those random games where he just needs the day off. But whenever he's questionable, I just assume he's going to play.
And then with that in mind, how do you like LeBron as a payoff option? How does he stack up against the likes of Luka, Nikola Jokic today? Is he still somebody you'd see yourself paying up for a good amount?
I think he's pretty firmly behind them in terms of projection, but he's also very far behind them in terms of ownership, which is interesting. He also does have the most appealing, well, relatively appealing positional eligibility. He's power forward center now, which is correct, I guess, but also annoying in fantasy. It would be a lot nicer if he was small forward, power forward. But he's only pulling 5% ownership, whereas you have 20 coming into Luka and Jokic, give or take. So from a pivot standpoint, it makes some sense. Obviously, he's really, really good without Anthony Davis out there. He's likely to give you around 36 minutes here if this game's competitive. But I think it is also just difficult to prioritize getting to him, because if I'm paying up, I am going to prefer getting to those other two. And then also, again, I think you can just make very strong lineups where basically nobody's over 10K.
And then is there anything else you want to look at from the Lakers? Is it a team where, Westbrook has played extended minutes as of late, but I kind of have issues with him now. And then the role players, nothing's really appealing. It's kind of LeBron or bust for me.
That's how I see it as well. Like Thomas Bryant's getting to a price point now where it's tempting just to say, oh, well, if you get that 30-minute game, he's going to destroy a $5,400 price tag. The problem is that you just haven't seen that playing time. He played 18 minutes last game, 18 and a half minutes last game. You got, Wenyen and Gabriel playing 23 and a half off the bench, but you've been getting those LeBron center minutes a decent percentage of the time as well, which is not ideal for Thomas Bryant's playing time. So it's just a really, really risky spot to get to. Gabriel's up to 4,600, which makes it tough to get there. When Westbrook and LeBron are in, I'm not really that interested in getting the Schroeder. It's LeBron or bust for me as well, and it's probably not a ton of LeBron either.
And that's going to do it for us today. If you guys haven't done yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. And don't forget, 5-day free trial at Stokastic. If you guys have never signed up before, get access to all of our tools for free for 5 days just by clicking on the link we have below. But check out what we have going on later here. NBA Deep Dive, NBA Live Before Lock. There's a lot of players on the injury report, so hope to see you guys here later. Good luck.
Let's go.
Go, go, go.